Hello and welcome to the Scholar Progenium. Today I've got what I hope will be a very interesting video for you guys as I tell you the tale of how I won gold at the first official Warlord Games tournament down at their HQ this weekend. So yes, ladies and gents, this weekend I was very lucky to be invited down to participate in Warlord Games' first official version 3 event at their HQ in Nottingham. And let me start off by saying it was just an absolutely fantastic day. A huge shout out to all of the players there and of course my opponents, but just everybody who travelled. There were people from Yorkshire, Manchester, south of England, and people who are local to the Warlord HQ as well, and everyone was just having a great time. I also want to say a massive thank you to the staff at the event and who man Warlord HQ, because they really made the day special, and I mean that. They looked after everybody and they were just joining in, laughing, joking, bantering around, watching the cool moments, the epic clashes on the battlefield. And it was just a really great day. Honestly, one of the best events I've been to in over a decade of competitive wargaming. Not only that, but the prize support was absolutely out of this world. From Wooden Spoon, Best Sportsman, Coolest Army, Third, Second and First, everyone walked away with handfuls of loot. So for myself, I got, first of all, this cool Inglorious model here. Can't wait to get him painted up for my Americans. But talking about my new American army that I've been building up behind the scenes, Warlord decided to throw in a half track to help me get those guys into action. And on top of that, couldn't believe this, but also an entire US airborne starter army. So we are rocking the US army. We're going to have a massive channel force for you guys. Can't wait to get those in action. And that's not even everything, because on top of that I've got some very exciting news for you guys. Warlord Games had a cheeky package for me to take away when I got down there. And look at this, it's a platoon of the brand new veteran infantry, so we can get these guys built up and painted so you guys can see them in action very soon on the channel. Now, I'm going to do a full video on these guys on Wednesday, but if you look at the sprue, that is just, sorry, that was the old Grenadier sprue because I'm going to compare them, but you just get everything. This is crazy. This is great for veteran players as well, because you get a heavy machine gun on the sprue, you get 2 Meade LMGs, you get a flamethrower on there, you get an anti-tank rifle on there, just absolutely everything you need to start upgrading your forces for version 3. And if you want to start collecting a new German army, wow. But I won't get too sidetracked by that, but thank you so much, Warlord, for the generous donation. Amazing. So as you can see, Warlord Games really pulled out all the stops on this one. It felt like a celebration of version 3 in many ways. And with all that being said, before we get into the meat and potatoes of the video, just one final shout out to the tournament organizer. The day could not have run more smoothly. It was just an efficient, well-oiled machine. So a massive thank you for all your hard work and giving the players and participants a really good day. So now let's jump straight into the tournament itself. Now the context of the tournament was that it was 16 players. It was a max 750 points, 13 dice lists, 4 platoons, but I don't think anyone was maxing out on that. And they encouraged people to take thematic, non-cheesy lists. Although, to be honest, it just seemed like standard competitive local tournament fare to me. People were taking decent lists. Now, I decided to go thematic with my list, but I still wanted to give it some edge. So the theme of my list was behind enemy lines, penetrating attacks, Finnish scout infantry list, sissy fighters to the core, so to speak. So with that in mind, I only took man portable weapons. If if you can't haul it on your back through the snow in the deep, dark forests of Finland, then it's not coming along. So with that in mind, I had a very straightforward but manoeuvrable force, and the first platoon was a rifle platoon led by a regular officer. It was 4 squads of sissies. So these guys, they're all veterans. They all have Master of the Hunt, which means they can advance into ambush. And it also means, and I also paid for Tough Fighter on every man, which was really useful in this event, because it just meant they were very reliable if I had to get into close combat. And it also meant my infantry could basically do anything I needed them to do. If they needed to shoot, they could. If they needed to maneuver, they could. If they needed to reposition and block a line, they could. And on top of that, they could also fight in close combat if I needed to get aggressive. Next up, we have my heavy weapons platoon. This is led by a regular officer, and he's got 2 Panzerschreck teams, one of which is veteran, just because I had a few points spare at the end, and also 2 regular medium machine guns. Now, the Panzerschrecks were certainly overkill in terms of anti-tank capabilities. I only faced 2 Hanemags in terms of armour over the whole tournament. No tanks of any kind or armoured cars. So in terms of killing, they weren't that significant, I guess, or, I could have spent the points better elsewhere. But I just had to make the most of them and use them for manoeuvres, for scoring objectives and that kind of thing. The medium machine guns were very handy, just giving me that extra dacker, considering I've got so many riflemen and not like any big bursts of fire from like SMGs or up close and stuff like that. And they were really useful, just putting those pins out, getting a couple of casualties here and there. A lot of people were just relying on regulars, and these guys can reliably get a wound on a regular squad every time they activate, and that adds up. Now, the big thing about this list was it was extremely flexible in being able to do what I needed to do, and that actually came in clutch from the very start of the tournament, before the first dice was even pulled from a dice bag, because we were expecting 4-foot by 4-foot tables, but Warlord actually managed to find the space in their warehouse to set up a couple more tables, and we had 6-foot by 4-foot tables, so a full gaming board for 750 points, which made things really interesting strategically in the manoeuvre game, and that's where the Finns really shine. So that certainly gave me an advantage, the ability to reposition, do mutual support on my forces. I won't waffle on too long about it because you'll see it in action in the game. So with all that being said, let's get stuck in to game 1. First up, we have Chris and his Italian Alpini force. Really cool thematic list here, and also very solid, well-rounded and effective. So starting off, he had a rifle platoon, 3 squads of 10 regular riflemen, plain and simple. Backing them up, he also had a light mortar regular. He had the points, as he said, and also he had a sniper regular and also a regular forward observer with 2 friends. And this was led by a regular officer with a friend as well. Next up, he had a heavy weapons platoon. This was led by a 3-man inexperienced officer squad. He also had a medic, I forgot to mention, in his rifle platoon. And then he had 3 light howitzers. So 12 dice in total, 2 more than me. I've only got 10 dice, and some real nasty HE firepower in there. So straight up, I know I'm going to be in for a challenge. Now, the mission itself was really simple. Meeting engagement, so we're coming on first wave. We decided to come on with everything, no reserves. It was long table edge setup, and it was kill points. So very straightforward. Let's get dice in the bag and let's start fighting. So to my delight, first game, and I'm on a winter map. It's a good omen. Surely the Italians are out of their depth in this scenario. Now, the table wasn't particularly balanced, but it was very good looking. We've got some buildings in the middle, and on Chris's side of the board, I've got more dense woodland on my side of the board. And if we look from the long table edge, you can see there's a lot of hard cover on this edge of the board here, which is going to be useful for me as I maneuver through it. In terms of infiltrators, my opponent put a sniper in this house, right in my face, overlooking my entire board edge. And he got that sniper on ambush pretty quickly first turn. He also had a forward observer in a bit of hard cover in the centre of the village with a good viewpoint across my lines as well. Now I start off by bringing a couple of sissy squads on right in front of that sniper with LMGs. I'm trying to bait out his sniper to shoot at one of those LMGs, which he does, and he fails to get the kill. I am putting fire into his forward observer with these couple of squads, trying to kill him off before he can launch his artillery barrage. But as you can see there, he places one right in between two squads of my sissy early on before he gets killed. Now with the sniper having activated his ambush, the way was clear for my Panzerschreck teams to advance into the woodland on my edge of the board and start popping shots into that window where the sniper's hiding. The first one missed, but the second one landed a hit, managed to kill off one of the sniper team, and then with just one pin, the sniper decided that these rockets were too hot for him and he left the board, failing a morale check. There wasn't much more exchange of fire, but as you can see at the end of the turn, I've just got infantry lining my table edge there, ready to do a wide advance with a machine gun in the centre looking through the centre of the town and a machine gun covering my right flank. He's got a mob of infantry ready to run up behind those buildings on my right flank. He's got a couple of howitzers shooting down the centre and also a howitzer on the left flank. So at the start of turn 2, his artillery strike came in successfully. Not only that, he did 2 pins to both the units, actually hitting one of my sissy squads and killing 4 of the men. They then, despite ranking up, failed their order check and immediately ran off the board. So that's a heavy blow for the Finns at the start of the proper game. However, the Finns came back swinging, and I could actually see his medic just clearly in the open between 2 buildings in an alleyway with one of my machine gun teams on my right flank. So I put a burst of fire into him and he dropped like a sack of potatoes. The Italians come back at the Finns with another blow. Their howitzer on my left flank lobs a shot into a squad of sissy that are advancing through the woodland on my edge of the board. Manages to kill 3 out of 7 on them, although luckily only puts 1 pin on. But at this point I'm losing fistfuls of veteran infantry. Now on this left flank I advance my 2 Panzerschreck teams, one out of the woodland, one up through the woodland. I pop a shot and I'm about 29 inches away from that howitzer. Now I also managed to advance up the squad that got hit by the howitzer, and on my right flank and centre I'm just advancing up with my infantry squads, trying to shoot that forward observer in the centre and kill him off for a dice. The forward observer was a tough nut to crack. He shot back and actually killed another one of my sissy. And as you can see, end of turn 2 on my opponent's side of the board, he's just moving all his infantry up. He's got one hidden away ready to take control of that house. He's got one advancing up his left flank in the centre, and he's got one right in the middle of the town. As we can see, end of turn 2, the Finns are quite spread out. I'm going to need to manoeuvre for some mutual fire support, and I'm also looking quite thin on the ground compared to where I started there, having lost half my infantry and facing a mob of Italians. First dice of turn 3 and it's finish, and I decide to fire my central MMG team over at one of his howitzers, killing one of the crew and putting a vital pin on it. He got the next dice and he decided to snap to his 2 central howitzers with his inexperienced officer. However, despite the officer's support, he got an 11 on his order check with one of the howitzers and went down. And then the other howitzer fired at my sissy squad in the hard cover, but they missed the shot. He then got another dice and decided to shoot down my left flank at one of my sissy squads that he'd already hit, and again he missed the shot. So that's his big punchy firepower for turn 3, all activated and nothing to show for it. On the left flank, I advance one of my Panzerschreck teams up and lob a shot at his light howitzer. I get a wound, but unfortunately he saves his hard cover save. Then I fire my other Panzerschreck team through the gap between the 2 houses in the centre of the village and managed to kill off one of his forward observers. Although he's still got 2 left, he's not lost any of them at this point, and I've been hosing them down for a couple of turns here. Really tough models to crack. Remaining 3 sissy on the left flank advance and fire at the howitzer, but to no effect. In the centre of the board, he moves a squad into that central building and we're just firing shots at each other, but to no effect. However, on the right flank, things start to heat up. Now I advance a sissy squad that's been shot at by a light mortar, and I fire into an advancing Italian squad in the woodland to the right. And they get a couple of casualties, so I follow this up quickly with a burst from MMG fire from the MMG team holding my right flank, and again get a couple of casualties. So as we sweep across the finish lines now, I'm progressing on that left flank and making that howitzer's life a bit of a nightmare. In the middle it's just a Mexican standoff, and on the right I'm outgunning this Italian squad here, and I've done some serious damage to them. He's got a squad in a house, and he's also got a squad in the centre just popping shots across at my Finns, just holding that village line, both of us. Start of turn 4, and I've now got an officer in support of my machine gun team and sissy squad on this right flank. So I start off with a snap 2 and just put 2 quick bursts of fire into those regulars cowering in the forest and just hose them down to 4 men now. Lions get the next dice and they decide to try and fire that howitzer on my left flank, holding his right flank against the Shreks and Sissy, and he fails the order check and goes down with that rocket shot and rifle burst, keeping him pinned. And things only go from bad to worse as my central MG fires a burst of fire and kills off one of his central howitzers. The Finnish luck continues as although he puts a burst of fire from his squad in the house and the squad moving up on the right hand side and his officer into my squad in the centre, my squad on the right flank and my officer supporting the squad on the right flank, all he gets is pins. I save all of my cover saves. At one point he has 2 wounds on my officer and I pass both on a 4-up. On my left flank I sprint one of my Panzerschreck teams up. I fire another Panzerschreck team through the village over towards his squad that's in the house. However, I'm just out of range. And then my sissy squad that are 3 men strong advance, and they position themselves so nearest to nearest they can charge the forward observer and get him without having to go through any terrain. And they also put a burst of 3 shots into his light mortar that's just behind that house, and they managed to kill him. To be honest, turn 4 was just one of those turns where I couldn't seem to fail a cover save, and he even hit one of my machine gun teams with his remaining howitzer, and I only lost 1 of the crew and took 1 pin. So as we sweep round the board, the Finns are holding the centre, and they're just hammering those Italians on the right flank. We've racked up a couple of kills now. Although he has got units that can fight back, I'm really putting the pressure on him. Turn 5, I start off by hammering shots again into those regulars on my right flank in the forest, but I fail to get any casualties from either my machine gun team or my sissy squad. He returns fire at me, trying to kill off my officer, but I go down and survive. On the left flank, he pops a howitzer at my 3-man sissy squad. I decide to go down as I'm right in the open there, and he gets the hit. However, he only gets 1 wound on the squad, thanks to their veterancy, and then they only get 1 pin on them as well because they passed that 5-up cover save for being down in the open. So not bad result from being hit by a howitzer. I then shoot a rocket launcher over at his forward observer, but I miss, so I just decided to bring my officer up to support those 2 units next turn, and then I advance my other Shrek right up in his face. I'm just over point blank range, sadly, and again, I miss this shot as well. In the centre, my opponent fires his howitzer over at my sissy squad in the hard cover, forcing them to go down, and then he repositions his infantry squad holding the centre of the village over to shoot a shot between 2 buildings at my officer. Now, my officer's already down. He gets a pin on me, gets a hit, but he doesn't manage to do any wounds. My central machine gun then fires over at his remaining central howitzer and again manages to get a wound. He's just shooting up this artillery position. He then brings another officer squad up to fire shots and again doesn't get any casualties. So as we sweep around the board, I'm really pushing up on the left flank. I'm able to shoot into the centre. In the centre of the board, I'm putting shots over at his back lines. And on the right, although he's putting loads of shots into me from the squad in the building, from the squads he's moved around, he's just failing to get kills on those veteran units in hard cover. Start of turn 6, and I declare a charge with that 3-man sissy squad, managing to reach his forward observer without having to go through any cover. We strike at the same time. He kills one of my sissy, but I wipe the forward observer's unit out, and then I consolidate into the barn behind them that they've just ran past. On the left flank, I move my Panzerschreck into point blank range of the howitzer holding this flank. Pop a shot at him. I get a hit to try and kill off the remaining crewman, but he manages to survive thanks to the gun shield. On the right flank, his squad holding the house manages to actually kill 2 of my sissy. However, I shoot back and again fail to kill off those regulars in the forest. They started to die quickly at first, but I can't seem to finish the squad off. Right flank, he advances his inexperienced 3-man officer squad from the artillery platoon into that bit of woodland and shoots at my Panzerschreck team, but thankfully doesn't even get a hit. Desperate need of kills, and on potentially the last turn of the game, my opponent advances his 3-man officer squad up to try and hose my officer down with his SMGs, but thankfully my officer once again survives with his cover saves. This is a well-timed attack. Although my officer is refusing to die, there's not much I can do in return to this squad despite them being in the open. However, I do manage to sling a couple of rifle shots from my central sissy squad across and actually get a casualty on them. Finally, he brings his 10-man regular squad that was holding the centre of the village round and shoots down the side of the building and finally kills off my officer. So at the end of turn 6, we roll the dice, we've got time on the clock, and we get the chance to play turn 7. And as we sweep around the board, we can see on my left flank, I've got a squad in that barn ready to back up my Panzerschreck. That's in a point-blank firefight with a howitzer. In the centre, I'm taking pins, I'm taking casualties, but I'm not losing any units. My machine gun's actually on 4 pins at this point. Then on his right flank, he's exposed some vulnerable units to try and get some kills, but he's still in the game. Italians get the first dice of turn 7. They point blank my Panzerschreck team, forcing me to go down. They do kill one of the crewmen, but I avoid having to run off the board by passing a morale check, thankfully. Then I respond by charging my 2-man sissy squad out of that barn into his inexperienced officer squad before he can try and finish off my Panzerschreck single man at point blank range. And despite him having 3 men and me having 2, I'm veteran tough fighter and he's just armed with rifles, and we quickly bayonet up that squad too. On the right flank, my remaining 3 sissy with an LMG make short work of his regular officer with SMGs, brassing them up and claiming another dice. The units in the centre and coming up the alleyway failed to kill off those sissy in return, and then my MMG shot into his regulars. Just 2 men left in that forest, but I still can't finish them off and they survive the game. So at the end of turn 7, I'd lost 2 units. My opponent had lost 7, so I had 8 remaining. He had 4 left on the board, and it was a win for the Finns. Now, I've got to give full credit to my opponent as we sweep around the board at the end of the turn. He made every right move, but turn 3, none of his howitzers hitting, and then turn 4, me having a really good burst of cover saves. Really changed the nature of the game, and it just from there it was a downhill spiral for the Italians, as the Finns were just too tough to kill with small arms fire, and I could just effectively suppress his remaining HE, and that was it. So I just want to say a big thank you to my opponent. It was an absolutely lovely game. I couldn't have had a nicer start to the event. We had a real laugh and the game was very exciting to boot. And with that, it's time to move on to Game 2, Urban Warfare against the Germans. So next up we have Rich and his Germans. Really genuinely nice guy. We got on like a house on fire. He's been playing Bolt Action a while and we're kind of a similar age, similar place in our lives. So we had just a lovely conversation throughout the course of the game as we exchanged various wargaming stories and had a laugh and so on and so forth. So in terms of army list, he had a rifle platoon with 4 squads of infantry. It was 1 squad of 5 vets, all with SMGs. One of those little 5-man Hanomags. He then had 3 squads of 10 regular infantry, 1 barebones rifles, 1 with an LMG, and 1 with 3 SMGs and a Panzerfaust. He also had a standard Hanomag, which the SMG 10-man squad went in, and then he had a heavy weapons support platoon with 2 inexperienced machine guns and a regular medium mortar. I don't believe he had a spotter for that. It might have even been an inexperienced mortar. In terms of the mission we were playing, it was key positions. We ended up with 5 objectives. We put 1 in each corner and 1 in the centre, give or take. and then Rich won the roll off for picking deployment zones, and we were on meeting engagement again with table quarters. So we didn't deploy anything at the start of the game, and we were coming on first wave, and again we didn't put anything in reserve, we just came on first wave with everything. As you can see from the board here, it's a lot of ruins. That red set of barrels just above the centre of the board is the 5th central objective. And then if you look, this is from my table quarter looking over towards his here. I'm on the left. Now I started bringing on my first units, 2 squads of Sissy, an officer and a Panzerschreck, up towards that central ruin. So I've got a nice defensive position to hold that central objective. I also brought a medium machine gun on, just pushing out of my table quarter to the left towards him, and for my trouble I got shot by a Hanomag and took a casualty and a pin. On the right flank it's another 2 squads of Sissy, another Shrek on the back corner in position to shoot at one of his Hanomags that comes on just before that Shrek. That Hanomag actually shot one of my squads of Sissy, again doing a casualty and a pin. So as you can see here, he's got a Hanomag going for one neutral table quarter objective. He's got a squad of infantry and another Hanomag going for the other. And as we sweep round, you can see I'm mainly focusing on that central objective. And then we're going to have a fight over this objective here. I'm closer to tagging it, but he's got a truck full of infantry coming towards it. On his table quarter, we can see again those veterans coming up. First dice of turn 6 was finished. I popped a shot with my Shrek into his Hanomag coming towards my objective, and knocked it out with a double pen. Then I fired my machine gun over at his inexperienced machine gun, but unfortunately we were out of range of each other. He launched a mortar into a squad of my Sissy, but he missed, and then I advanced my Sissy squad into the central ruin, going into ambush and firing as well. He then advanced with his Hanomag and shot at my Shrek team that was just lagging behind. I went down and fortunately survived that burst of fire. He hopped out his veteran squad into a crater. I then advanced with my squads of veterans and shot with both of them into his inexperienced machine gun team, and managed to do 2 casualties to it. My opponent finished the turn by dashing an officer onto his objective in his starting table quarter, tagging it, but he got shot by an ambush from a couple of rifles from one of those central squads and took a casualty. And as we sweep around here, we can see I'm almost playing lengthways here and pushing these squads up on the right to secure one half of the board and 3 objectives. And he's only got 1 squad isolated out there. He needs to get that other squad in his table quarter up to support them. However, he's got veterans and other infantry in the neutral table quarter. Start of turn 3, I advanced with a Sissy squad and put pressure on his inexperienced machine gun team, but failed to kill it off despite firing 2 squads at it. On the left flank, my machine gun team shoots at his mortar team, but I'm just out of range, and in return he shoots his mortar back at my machine gun team, although he fails to hit. He then moves a couple of squads round the back of a big building in the neutral table quarter, coming towards my machine gun team there. And then I push my squads in the central ruin up, and I'm firing across at his infantry that got knocked out of the Hanomag, but I just cannot hit them for love nor money. You can see in this picture here, a couple of squads actually roll all 2s and 3s, don't even get pins on his units. We advance into ambush with 1 squad, claiming the central objective and going into ambush, and then he tries to pull back with his dismounted infantry and takes a casualty and a pin for his trouble from that ambush. And as you can see, as we sweep around here, I'm just pushing all of my forces up to that centre, firing with the units that I can as I go. I'm even bringing my machine gun team up closer, and he's actually pulled back into his deployment table quarter. He's got a couple of infantry units in there now, but he is pushing round that big back building with a squad of 5 SMG veterans and a squad of infantry. Start of turn 4, and he backs up his little Hanomag, sprays across at my Panzerschreck, but to no effect. I just then engage in a firefight with him with my central units, bringing some up, shooting with others. My machine gun team also fires into his inexperienced machine gun team, but he is getting hard cover from most of these shots and ultimately continues to survive somehow. He then shoots a mortar over at my machine gun team, which I stupidly neglected to move when I could have done, and he gets a direct hit on there, wipes all of the squad out just in one blow. Continue to push up into his deployment table quarter now, though my sissy still can't hit the broadside of a barn. He pushes his infantry squad round into the other neutral table quarter and claims that objective, and he's bringing his other infantry squads together ready to defend his table quarter, shooting down onto my advancing sissy infantry as he goes. I bring another squad up advancing, and then essentially it's just manoeuvres as we reposition our forces to engage each other in the latter half of the game, and I ultimately have like 3-4 squads of sissy up towards his neutral table quarter. As we sweep around now, you can see I've got one in the ruin, one outside the ruin, and then 2 more advanced out of the ruin there, so I'm able to run towards his objective next turn, and I'm just repositioning that back squad ready to fire some shots down his flank. Start of the next turn, he continues to shoot his little Hanomag over at my Panzerschreck team, and I continue to go down as he's out of my return fire range. I continue to push units up, and I'm just swarming with veterans, advancing into his table quarter, shooting at his officer, and managed to kill an extra unit off, and that's going to be important later. And as you can see, I'm just swarming with veterans towards him, and he starts bringing units up behind that ruin and shooting back at me, but with hard cover and having to wound me on 5-ups, he's just not getting the kills he needs, although I've not really done many casualties to him either. Now, as you can see here, although he does own that central objective in his table quarter, he's actually repositioned over 3 inches away from it, and likewise on the objective in the neutral table quarter, he's just repositioning to shoot my sissy. But that means I can sneakily potentially dash on and grab those objectives. With that in mind, I advance one of my officers out of line of sight but within 12 inches of the other neutral objective. And as you can see as we sweep around, I've got a ton of forces pouring towards the objective in his table quarter, although he does have an absolute stack of defenders. He's got 2 machine gun teams there, 2 squads of regular infantry, and a couple of officers as well. Going into the final turn of the game here, I'm advancing my sissy just up into that ruin there, and I get another squad right in the open. I'm shooting at his officer because if I've only got one more objective than him, I'm going to need to beat him on kill points as well, because you've got to win by more than 1 point, of course. He's bringing his infantry up and just hammering my sissy as they're in the open. Now at this stage, I decide to go down with the squad I was preparing to run onto his home objective, because I've still got this officer squirreled away looking at the other neutral objective. However, I get my dice before him, so I'm just forced to go down, because otherwise he'd shoot me to pieces if I hopped onto it and I wouldn't take the objective. So ultimately, he does end up spraying up my unit that's in the open down to just 3 men, forcing me to take an end of turn morale check sort of with the last activation. But fortunately, I didn't run away from that burst of fire, and because of that, I had 1 more kill point than him and 1 more objective than him. So it's a good job this 3-man squad did not run away from that burst of fire, I can tell you. But that's what won me the game. And overall, as we can see, I was pretty confident with my positioning. I was all over him with my veteran infantry, just pushing him back. I had 3 objectives secured, and I had secure plans if the dice went in the order I needed them to get both of the other objectives, or at least one of the other objectives, to win it securely on objectives. However, it wasn't to be. He got the dice in the order he needed them. So ultimately, it was a secure victory and a really fun cat and mouse tactical game, with only 1 loss for the Finns and 2 units lost for the Germans. Final match, and with 2 wins and a good spread of both kill points and mission points, I was on top table versus my brother Tim, or as you guys know him, Mordian Glory, and he was running his Japanese force. He had 3 massive squads of regular infantry, 2 of 14, 1 of 13. He also had a couple of the artillery shell carrying anti-tank guys. He had another platoon, and in this it was a heavy weapons platoon with a regular mortar with a spotter and an inexperienced medium machine gun. He then had a 3rd platoon which had a light howitzer and a light anti-tank gun in it, and 3 officers to make up, I think, 13 dice in total. long table edge deployment and double envelopment in old money terms. So we had to run units off the board for 3 points or into the opponent's deployment zone for 1 point. As you can see from my deployment, I've got a machine gun squad facing off against his on one flank, and then as we sweep along, I've just got infantry lining the board with officer support, and then on my right flank I've got another squad of infantry. However, they're slightly outnumbered by a squad of 14 infantry with 2 bomb support guys and an officer. He's got more howitzers and infantry in the middle. He's got a squad of infantry and his support teams over on the other flank. First dice of the game for the Japanese, and he lobbed a shot with his mortar and hit one of my sissy squads, killing 2 of the men. He then lobbed a shot with his howitzer as well, but fortunately missed with this air shot. Then as turn 1 proceeded, I was just advancing into ambush with some units, advancing and firing with other units, and I have to give Tim massive credit here because it's his first time playing against the Finns, and he absolutely bossed it. He knew when to activate rifleman units and shoot at some units. He knew when it was safe to advance. And at the end of turn 1, I'd taken a couple of casualties so far, and he had basically taken no casualties, although I have manoeuvred and pushed forward across the board, whereas he has remained relatively stationary. On the left flank, I do manage to dash one of my Shrek teams almost up to the halfway mark, and then as we sweep around the board here, we can see they're under covering fire from a couple of machine gun teams, and my other infantry are just advancing with officer support. On the right flank, I am in trouble though. Turn 2, he kills another one of my sissy with a mortar shot, and then I start pushing my infantry up in the centre of the board, out of the river to the halfway mark. My machine gun continues to shoot, both of my machine guns continue to shoot over at his inexperienced machine gun, just hammering it down to 1 man remaining, although his light anti-tank gun does pop a shot at my bazooka team, as does his machine gun, and I have to go down to survive. And then as we sweep over turn 2, you can see I'm just pushing up with my infantry, ambushing, shooting and advancing, mutual fire support. But Tim, again, he's playing the game really well here, and he's got a squad up on the right flank, and I've not got much over there to stop them. Start of the next turn, and I advance into ambush with a couple of squads looking up the hill, and I also shoot one of my rifle squads in fire support. My machine gun team continues to spray down into his inexperienced machine gun team, and we do manage to finish it off from a couple of bursts of fire. He fires his mortar over at my sissy squad on the right flank and finishes off that squad, clearing the way for his advancing units. I advance a 3rd squad up against the wall in the centre of the board, but I unleash their ambush shortly afterwards when he moves his big squad up just across the centre of the board on the other side of that bridge. I then dash my Shrek squad up well past the halfway mark, and at the end of the turn you can see I've got that Shrek squad basically ready to score. I've got plenty of infantry just up in his face, stopping him from pushing forward, but ultimately there's not much I can do about them. There's so much there, he's going to win the firefight. And then as we sweep over from the right flank, we can see I'm just massively outnumbered and outgunned here. I can't really push into his deployment zone with my infantry. All I can do is hold him off. Out of turn 4, and we're actually running out of time here. We've only got about 45 minutes left on the clock because we're just having too much fun laughing and joking around. We're having an absolute blast. Now I get my squad on the right flank and I put them in ambush, ready to defend against any incoming charges. I also advance a couple of my other squads, firing off shots, trying to suppress the incoming Japanese infantry because I'm really danger close now, and he's got overwhelming numbers against me. He decides to charge my squad on the right after baiting out their ambush, and because of his fanatic, although we fight a couple of rounds of combat, he takes some casualties, but ultimately he wipes out that squad on the right flank. Left flank, I reckon I'm just over 12 inches away from his board edge, so instead I advance around the corner of the building I've been hiding behind and shoot an officer that he's got waiting there and blow him up with my Panzerschreck team. On the right flank, Tim ran 1 squad of infantry, 2 bomb guys and an officer up to the edge of my deployment zone, another turn and he'll make it in and start scoring. His howitzer then got a direct hit on one of my sissy squads, but it results in just one pin. I didn't even lose any casualties, and me and Tim were just absolutely roaring with laughter throughout this game, because Tim was rolling so hot to wound me. He was getting like, it was like I was inexperienced instead of veteran. He was getting like 5 wounds out of 7 hits, stuff like that. But in return, I was just rolling all my cover saves and failing like 1 for every insane burst of fire. So despite us both rolling insanely hot, neither of us were getting anywhere really in terms of killing each other with firepower. This being the case, it was time to fix bayonets, lads, and all across the battlefield, the fighting devolved into vicious hand-to-hand combat. I started proceedings by charging one of my officers on the back right flank into one of Tim's bomb operatives before he could dash into my deployment zone, killing both men. Over on the left centre, I charged again into one of his regular squads, and we had a couple of rounds of combat here thanks to him being fanatic and me being veteran tough fighter. But ultimately, again, Tim's mob of regular infantry got the better of my all tough fighter veterans, and he wiped out another squad, preventing me consolidating into his deployment zone. I then dashed into his deployment zone with one of my officers just to the right of the building, with only a mortar there to stop him. However, Tim charged me with that mortar and again finished off one of my Finnish squads, stopping me from scoring with him as well. Over on the right flank, Tim dashed his big 12-man squad of infantry into my deployment zone, and then the last dice was called, and that was it. I had previously run my Panzerschreck team off. However, Tim only had 2 dice left in the bag at the end of the turn, so we're like, just pull them, it doesn't matter, it's like 5 seconds. So he ran up his bomb operative and his officer as well towards my deployment zone. However, unfortunately, it didn't matter because his other squad was so long that these guys didn't actually make it into the deployment zone, so they didn't score at the end of the game, and we'd run out of time having played 5 turns. My first dice at the start of this turn had been to run my Panzerschreck team off, scoring me 3 points, and despite that vicious back and forth at the end of the game, no one had managed to get any other units surviving in the other's deployment zone. So Tim had 1 point for his squad of infantry sat on the edge of my table edge, and I had 3 points. Now the clock had run out and it was the end of the game, but if we'd had literally another minute, we could have played out turn 6. You see, the fight in the centre of the battlefield was over. On my left flank, I had 2 more units that were able to dash into Tim's deployment zone and score me an additional 2 points to go up to 5 points in total. And Tim, of course, could have run off his infantry squad that was right on my table edge, scoring 3 points, and got his officer and his bomb operative into my deployment zone, scoring another 2 points to make it 5 all and a draw. Now we're on an absolute cliffhanger here. Me and Tim proceed to have a brotherly discussion about what we should do. I agree with Tim that it seems only fair to play this game out to its natural conclusion, considering just how obvious what that conclusion is. However, Tim acknowledges on the other side, I'm in a winning position here, so, it's essentially me throwing the game away at a tournament. So I say, look, let's dice off to it. 1 to 3, it's a draw. 4 to 6, I win. Tim's like, I don't know if that's really fair. We are at a tournament. Let's get the TO over and he can decide. And the TO came over and ultimately he made the decision, look, it was dice down a couple of dice ago, boys. The result is what the result is. We're running a tight ship here. And that was the end result. I won 3-1, which is obviously good news for me. So with 3 wins in the bag, it was gold for the Finns, and the rest is history, I suppose. So I won't waffle on any longer today. If you've liked the video and you enjoy what we do here, make sure you give us a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out, and it makes sure you don't miss out on all of our weekly bolt action content. A big shout out to all of our channel members. We really appreciate you guys, and I hope you found this video interesting and entertaining. This has been the Scholar Progenium. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.